Some executives think stripping away my security badge is enough to break me. They forget one crucial detail. Because I spent 8 years pouring the concrete for their shiny glass empire, I know exactly where to plant the dynamite. They thought they were just firing an obedient employee. Instead, they unleashed a nightmare they will never have enough money to buy back. Pour yourself a strong glass of bourbon. This story is not for the weak. Welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories, and thank you all so very much for being here with us today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to continue operating or uploading new videos on this platform for the foreseeable future, which means we are officially transitioning all our main operations over to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to even longer, exclusive true-life revenge stories with much deeper plot details and full multi-voice audiocasts that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description and pinned comment below. Now, make yourself comfortable, because my name is Amelia Robinson, and this is how 8 years of blood, sweat, and absolute loyalty were rewarded with the ultimate corporate betrayal. I was 34 years old, holding the title of Director of Project Development at Vanguard Zenith Holdings, a monolithic commercial real estate titan towering 40 stories above downtown Chicago. For 8 full years, I poured my youth into that firm, regularly pulling 80-hour work weeks, surviving on lukewarm black coffee while shaping the city's skyline piece by piece. I knew every zoning regulation, every structural engineer, and every political controller in Cook County. I built Vanguard's reputation brick by brick. Then came Trenton Vance. Trenton was 28, held the title of Chief Strategy Officer, and possessed exactly zero real-world experience. His sole qualification was being the favored nephew of our Chief Executive Officer, Arthur Vance. Trenton was the quintessential corporate tech bro. He wore slim-fit charcoal turtlenecks regardless of the weather, strutted around the glass offices with an air of unearned superiority, and loved peppering every conversation with empty buzzwords like synergy, disruptive spatial modeling, and neural-driven efficiency. He held absolute contempt for field experience, firmly believing that a fancy artificial intelligence program could instantly replace decades of hard-won architectural wisdom. The absolute jewel in our corporate crown was the $1.2 billion waterfront development complex owned by Eleanor Sterling. Eleanor was a self-made billionaire with a steel trap for a mind and a total intolerance for corporate incompetence. It had taken me 3 grueling years of late-night dinners, flawless technical proposals, and complete operational transparency to convince her to hand that career-defining project to Vanguard. It was supposed to cement my position as senior partner. Instead, Trenton saw an opportunity to snatch the glory. Wanting to cut operational expenses by 30% and showcase his precious new software, he secretly bypassed standard engineering protocols. He utilized an unvetted, experimental spatial artificial intelligence program to generate and submit the final blueprint package for our Chicago zoning permit. The software made a catastrophic calculation error, completely failing to account for bedrock soil density and lakefront environmental preservation laws, triggering a severe regulatory compliance violation with the city government. Word leaked back to the executive board within 48 hours. At 7 o'clock on a freezing Tuesday morning, an emergency board meeting was summoned on the top floor. I walked into the boardroom expecting a technical strategy session to resolve the municipal error. Instead, I walked straight into an execution chamber. Sitting at the head of the polished mahogany table, CEO. Arthur Vance looked at me with cold, calculated indifference. Beside him, Trenton sat wearing his signature turtleneck, looking like a nervous coward hiding behind his uncle. "Amelia," Arthur said, his voice flat and rehearsed. "We have reviewed the municipal zoning compliance disaster on the Sterling waterfront project. The board cannot tolerate such gross negligence." I stood frozen, pointing straight at Trenton. "What are you talking about?" Trenton bypassed my team and authorized those AI-generated filings without a single verification stamp from a licensed structural engineer. Trenton leaned forward, sliding a printed thread of emails across the polished table. That is not what the internal logs reflect. Amelia, according to these server records, you explicitly commanded the junior staff to bypass physical inspection protocols to meet your personal deadline. Your outdated, careless methods have put a $1.2 billion client relationship in jeopardy. I grabbed the papers. The email timestamps were blatantly doctored. The header signatures forged using administrative access codes only executive officers possessed. They had framed me. They needed a sacrificial lamb to protect the chief executive's nephew from complete professional ruin, and I was the most convenient target. "This is a total fabrication," I said, my voice dangerously calm, looking Arthur dead in the eye. "You forged these logs." Arthur did not even blink. "Effective immediately. Amelia Robinson, your employment with Vanguard Zenith Holdings is terminated for severe cause. You are forfeiting all accrued stock options and severance packages." Before I could speak another word, 2 heavy oak doors opened. 2 uniformed security guards marched in, flanking my sides. Within 5 minutes, my corporate smartphone was yanked from my hands, my digital access badges were wiped, and I was handed 2 cardboard boxes containing 8 years of my life. They paraded me down the open-plan central floor, right past 40 workstations where former colleagues lowered their heads, too terrified to meet my gaze. Trenton stood by the glass elevators, leaning against the doorframe with a smirk, quietly sipping an espresso. "It is just business, Amelia," he whispered as the elevator doors began to slide shut. "The future belongs to algorithms, not legacy dinosaur workers." I did not cry. I did not scream or plead. I simply looked at his reflection in the polished glass, locked eyes with him, and let a cold, razor-sharp smirk spread across my face. They thought they had just taken my job. They had no idea they had just handed me the key to their complete destruction. I did not go home and drown myself in a bottle of cheap wine. I did not spend the next 48 hours crying into a pillow or calling my mother to complain about the cosmic injustice of corporate America. When you spend almost a decade swimming with great white sharks, you do not bleed when they bite you. You just calculate the exact angle to rip out their gills. My apartment was dead silent. I threw my 2 cardboard boxes onto the kitchen island and pulled out my original employment contract. Vanguard's legal team thought they had completely paralyzed me with an ironclad non-compete clause, designed to keep me out of the commercial real estate market for 2 full years, but they were sloppy, or perhaps just arrogant. I cross-referenced the document with Illinois state labor statutes. The law was beautifully clear. A non-compete agreement is entirely unenforceable if the employee is terminated without legally justifiable cause and denied a fair severance package. By framing me and firing me for cause to save a quick buck, Arthur and his nephew had inadvertently set me entirely free. But freedom was not enough. I needed ammunition. At 11 o'clock that night, I made a secure call from a prepaid burner phone to Marcus. Marcus was a senior municipal zoning inspector for the city of Chicago. 5 years ago, when his department was drowning in a political scandal over delayed permits, I quietly funneled him resources and expedited a massive civic project that saved his pension. He owed me his life. We met in the underground parking garage of a deserted diner at 2 a.m. He rolled down the window of his rusted sedan and handed me a black encrypted flash drive. "Do not ever call me again," he whispered, staring straight ahead as he hit the gas and drove away into the freezing rain. That drive contained the unaltered, raw server access logs from the city's zoning portal. It documented the exact internet protocol addresses and digital signature timestamps of the person who uploaded those flawed architectural plans. It was not my credential. The logs clearly proved the upload originated directly from Trenton's personal terminal. I had the smoking gun. Any normal person would have marched straight to a high-powered employment lawyer and filed a massive wrongful termination lawsuit. I did not want a settlement check. I wanted total annihilation. The very next morning, I liquidated $250,000 of my personal stock portfolio. I did not rent a shiny glass office in the financial district. Instead, I leased an abandoned, windowless brick warehouse on the industrial edge of the South Side. It smelled like motor oil and damp concrete, but it had heavy steel doors, zero corporate surveillance, and absolute privacy. I hauled in 3 massive drafting tables, set up an encrypted local server network, and officially registered my new entity. Ironclad Development Limited Liability Company was born in the shadows. With the bunker established, I began laying the tripwires. I started scheduling casual, highly discreet coffee dates with 4 of my former core team members at Vanguard. These were the master architects, the senior structural engineers, the people who actually built the buildings while Trenton played with his digital toys. They were miserable. Trenton had immediately instituted a series of absolutely absurd key performance indicators, forcing senior engineers to log their restroom breaks and demanding they use his faulty software to cut design times by 50%. We met at small, independent coffee shops miles away from the Vanguard Tower. I did not try to convince them to quit. I did not beg them to join a risky startup. I simply sat across from them, bought them a dark roast, and slid a leather-bound portfolio across the table. Inside were the preliminary structural sketches of what a real, unhindered commercial real estate firm could build. I showed them a vision where engineers made the decisions, not algorithms. I watched the spark of rebellion ignite in their eyes. "Hold your positions," I told them quietly. "Endure the torture just a little longer, and wait for my signal." While my sleeper agents remained inside the Vanguard walls, I turned my attention to the enemy's lifeblood, their cash flow. Using a complex web of public financial disclosures, shadow accounting analyses, and anonymous industry forums, I began mapping Vanguard Zenith Holdings' liquidity. The picture that emerged was breathtakingly fragile. The Titan was bleeding to death from 1,000 self-inflicted cuts. Arthur had authorized the diversion of tens of millions of dollars away from stable real estate acquisitions and dumped it directly into Trenton's portfolio of useless artificial intelligence startups. Vanguard was severely over-leveraged. They were burning through cash reserves at a terrifying rate, desperate for a massive payout to cover their mounting debts. They needed the Sterling waterfront project to survive. Without Eleanor Sterling's billion-dollar contract, Vanguard would default on their massive commercial loans within 90 days. They were standing on a trapdoor. All I had to do was pull the lever. The transition of power at Vanguard Zenith Holdings was as smooth as a train derailment. With my office cleared out and my name erased from the corporate directory, Trenton officially assumed total command of the Sterling waterfront project. He was absolutely ecstatic. This was his grand moment to prove that a 28-year-old with a shiny degree and a subscription to an enterprise artificial intelligence platform could outmaneuver an entire generation of seasoned builders. To celebrate his new authority, Trenton invited Eleanor Sterling to the Vanguard Tower for a massive milestone presentation. He did not prepare architectural blueprints. He did not prepare geotechnical surveys. Instead, he transformed the executive suite into a cutting-edge virtual reality simulation room. When Eleanor walked through the glass doors, wearing her signature tailored wool coat and an expression of pure business pragmatism, Trenton handed her a sleek white virtual reality headset. He confidently guided her through a glittering digital wonderland. He showed her holographic reflections on the glass facades, computer-generated sunlight bouncing off the harbor, and simulated happy citizens walking through the retail plazas. It was a beautiful, flawless digital fantasy. There was just one massive, catastrophic reality that his software failed to render. The physical soil beneath the actual Chicago harbor was actively subsiding. The waterfront bedrock was dangerously unstable, a critical detail my team had been meticulously monitoring and planning to reinforce before I was ousted. Trenton's artificial intelligence completely ignored the messy, complicated physics of shifting mud and eroding limestone, prioritizing aesthetic algorithms over structural integrity. Eleanor Sterling was not a tech investor easily wooed by digital parlor tricks. She was a self-made billionaire who started her empire buying rundown industrial laundromats and negotiating with union contractors in the freezing rain. She knew the difference between a real building and a video game. Midway through Trenton's enthusiastic monologue about spatial synergy, Eleanor ripped the virtual reality headset off her face. The heavy plastic device slammed onto the polished mahogany conference table with a sickening crack, shattering the right lens. The entire executive suite fell into a dead, horrifying silence. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Eleanor demanded, her voice slicing through the room like a steel cable snapping. "Your own geotechnical reports from last month show a 3-inch soil subsidence along the eastern seawall. If we pour concrete based on this digital fairy tale, the entire foundational structure will crack in half before the roof is even on. Where is the physical engineering solution?" Trenton stood frozen, his confident smile melting into a mask of pure panic. He stammered, frantically looking at his tablet, muttering something about the algorithm needing a recalibration update. Eleanor did not wait for his excuse. She leaned over the table, glaring directly into his terrified eyes. "You have exactly 14 days to present a mathematically proven, physically viable reinforcement strategy for that seawall. If I do not have a real solution on my desk by then, I am pulling every single cent of my funding, and I will personally ensure this firm never touches a patch of dirt in this city again." She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving the Vanguard executive team in a state of absolute, breathless chaos. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. Panic infected every floor of the Vanguard Tower. Trenton, desperate to save his own skin and terrified of his uncle's wrath, immediately went on the offensive. He refused to admit his software was flawed. Instead, he scapegoated the engineering department, screaming that they had fed incorrect environmental data into his system. By 5 o'clock that evening, he had publicly fired 3 of the most respected veteran structural engineers in the company. It was a fatal mistake. The internal morale did not just drop, it completely imploded. My sleeper agents texted me live updates from the trenches. Vanguard was eating itself alive. I knew exactly where Eleanor Sterling went when she was furious. Later that night, the freezing Chicago rain pounded against the streets. I walked into a heavily shadowed, strictly exclusive jazz lounge tucked away in a basement off the main avenue. It was practically empty, save for a low-playing saxophone and the clinking of glasses. In the far corner booth, illuminated only by a small amber table lamp, sat Eleanor. She was staring into a glass of neat rye whiskey, looking like a general who had just realized she was surrounded by incompetent mercenaries. I did not wear a corporate suit. I wore a simple black trench coat. I walked over and slid into the booth opposite her without asking for permission. Eleanor looked up, her sharp eyes narrowing. "If Arthur Vance sent you here to apologize for that spectacular clown show this morning, you can save your breath and walk right back out into the rain. Amelia." "Arthur Vance does not own me anymore," I replied, keeping my voice low and steady over the jazz music. "And I did not come here to apologize for their stupidity. I came here to fix your building." I did not pull out a laptop. I did not offer her a holographic presentation. I reached into my coat and pulled out a large, heavy roll of thick drafting paper. I swept her whiskey glass to the side and unrolled the blueprint flat across the mahogany table. It was a completely hand-drawn, painstakingly detailed structural schematic. For the past 2 weeks, locked in my windowless warehouse, I had manually calculated every single load-bearing metric, every soil density ratio, and every cubic yard of reinforced steel needed to stabilize the eastern seawall. It was raw, brilliant, old-school engineering. Eleanor leaned in. Her eyes scanned the complex web of graphite lines and mathematical notations. She traced her finger along the deep foundation pile designs I had mapped out. For 3 full minutes, neither of us said a word. The only sound was the steady rhythm of the rain outside and the low hum of the saxophone. She understood exactly what she was looking at. It was the exact solution Vanguard had failed to provide. Finally, Eleanor leaned back against the leather booth. A slow, dangerous smile crept onto her face. She looked at the blueprints, then looked directly into my eyes. "How much do you want?" she asked. I did not blink. I rolled the blueprints back up and held them in my hand. "I do not want your money," I said quietly. "I want total, absolute control of this project, and I want it under the name of my own company." Eleanor Sterling stared at me for a long moment, reading the absolute resolve in my face. Then, she raised her glass of whiskey, nodded once, and took a slow sip. The ink on the master contractor agreement dried in the quiet, expansive luxury of Eleanor's private penthouse office. It was a staggering legal document, officially transferring the entire development mandate of the $1.2 billion waterfront complex to Ironclad Development Limited Liability Company. I sat across the polished mahogany desk as Eleanor signed her name with aggressive, sweeping strokes that tore into the heavy parchment. "This is not just business anymore, Amelia," Eleanor said, handing me the executed contract. "This is pest control." But we did not issue a press release. We did not send a formal termination notice to Arthur Vance. That would have been entirely too merciful. If you want to trap a cornered, arrogant predator, you have to let it believe it is still the king of the jungle. Eleanor and I agreed to maintain absolute radio silence for exactly 14 days, deliberately ignoring Trenton's frantic email updates and dodging Arthur's increasingly desperate phone calls. We wanted them to sweat in the dark. We needed them to panic, overreact, and make a fatal financial maneuver to save their sinking ship. And panic they did, inside the glass walls of Vanguard Zenith Holdings. The atmosphere had turned utterly toxic, with Eleanor's deadline looming like a massive executioner's axe. Arthur realized a terrifying truth. Even if his golden boy nephew somehow managed to produce a miraculous engineering fix from his broken software, the firm completely lacked the liquid capital required to physically execute the heavy construction. Trenton's obsessive investments into unproven artificial intelligence startups had bled their corporate treasury completely dry, desperate to plug a catastrophic $100 million hole and appease the billionaire client they falsely believed they could still save. Arthur made the ultimate arrogant corporate gamble. He decided to liquidate their most prestigious physical asset. He initiated a massive sale and leaseback agreement for their own corporate headquarters. Vanguard did not actually own the 40-story skyscraper outright. They held a master, 99-year commercial lease that gave them total executive dominion over the property. In a frantic, sweating bid for immediate cash, Arthur's board of directors voted anonymously to sell that master lease to a private commercial real estate investment fund, agreeing to immediately rent the building back as tenants. It was a classic, desperate corporate survival tactic. Sell the ground beneath your own feet, to keep your head above the rising water. Arthur walked away from the closing table with a massive cash injection, blindly believing he had just secured the fortress and saved his empire. He had absolutely no idea who he had just sold his castle to. The anonymous investment fund that wired hundreds of millions of dollars into Vanguard's accounts was a brilliantly disguised shell corporation. The capital originated entirely from the private treasury of Eleanor Sterling. She had aggressively routed the money through 3 offshore trusts and a labyrinth of corporate shielding, making it completely impossible for Arthur's panicked legal team to trace the true source of the funds back to his own client. But the most beautiful, lethal detail of the transaction was buried deep on page 412 of the finalized acquisition contract. Under the specific section dictating the physical management and executive control of the property, the anonymous fund had legally appointed a sole managing director with absolute, unquestionable authority over the leaseholder rights. I sat in my damp, windowless Southside warehouse, staring at the freshly authenticated digital document glowing on my encrypted server monitor. Right there, printed in crisp black and white, was the designated asset manager, Amelia Robinson. Arthur Vance had just handed me the legal right to evict him from his own throne room. With the financial guillotine securely locked in place, it was time to strip Vanguard of its final, remaining defense mechanism, the actual, breathing talent. For weeks, Trenton had been relentlessly torturing the engineering department, screaming at senior architects to fix his algorithm's catastrophic mistakes while openly threatening their quarterly bonuses and pensions. My sleeper agents had reached their absolute breaking point. I pulled out my burner phone and sent a single, encrypted text message to my 4 core loyalists. The message contained only 2 words: execute order. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning on a rainy Thursday, while Arthur and Trenton were safely asleep in their suburban mansions dreaming of their financial shell game, a synchronized digital strike occurred. My 4 senior architects and master structural engineers simultaneously logged into Vanguard's internal human resources portal. They did not leave polite 2-week notices. They did not request an exit interview. They hit send on their immediate, unconditional resignation letters at the exact same millisecond. Then, utilizing their high-level security clearances, they triggered a total, irreversible wipe of their personal hard drives, meticulously scrubbing every ounce of their proprietary, non-patented engineering workflows, custom templates, and contact databases from Vanguard's network. They left behind absolutely nothing but the standard, useless company screensavers. By 2:15 in the morning, they were standing in the freezing drizzle outside my industrial warehouse, holding thermoses of hot dark roast coffee. I unbolted the heavy steel doors and let them into the warmth of the ironclad headquarters. "Welcome to the winning side," I told them, spreading the massive waterfront blueprints across the main drafting table. "Let us show these boys how to actually build." When the sun finally rose over the Chicago skyline the next morning, Vanguard Zenith Holdings was effectively a hollow corpse that just had not realized its heart had stopped beating. They were sitting in a 40-story skyscraper they no longer controlled, legally obligated to pay rent to a ghost, and staring at a fleet of incredibly expensive, blinking server racks running artificial intelligence software that possessed absolutely no idea how to draft a legally compliant municipal building permit. They had the custom-tailored suits, they had the corner glass desks, but the soul of the company, the actual people who knew how to pour concrete and read a soil density report, were entirely gone. The stage was perfectly set, the trap was fully loaded, primed, and aimed right at their heads. All that was left to do was to walk into their house and pull the trigger in broad daylight. Vanguard Zenith Holdings decided to mask their catastrophic internal bleeding with a massive, blinding public spectacle. They could not afford to let the commercial real estate industry smell the blood in the water. So, they hosted a grandiose press conference right in the cavernous, 60-foot-high marble lobby of their own headquarters. The event was aggressively marketed to the financial press and local business journals as the official launch of their future space strategy. It was nothing but a pathetic, glittering smokescreen. They designed this event to convince their remaining shareholders that the sudden, mysterious departure of their top engineering talent the previous night was merely a strategic corporate pivot toward artificial intelligence and not a fatal exodus. Arthur Vance stood safely off to the side of the stage, wearing a bespoke navy suit, projecting a hollow, desperate aura of executive control, but it was Trenton who stood front and center behind the crystal podium. He looked incredibly smug, wearing a brand-new charcoal turtleneck, eagerly soaking in the bright flashes of 50 different media cameras. He spoke passionately into the microphone about algorithms replacing manual labor and optimizing urban footprints, entirely oblivious to the terrifying fact that his company was effectively a rotting corpse. He was selling a vision of a future that Vanguard would never live to see. Trenton was right in the middle of a heavily rehearsed sentence about digital synergy and market disruption when the heavy revolving glass doors of the main lobby violently stopped spinning. The perimeter security guards immediately stepped forward to intercept the disturbance, but they instantly froze in their tracks. Eleanor Sterling did not just walk into a room, she commanded the physical gravity of the space. She marched straight down the central marble aisle, wearing a striking crimson trench coat, flanked by 2 towering corporate litigation attorneys. The sea of seasoned financial reporters instinctively parted for her, their cameras turning away from the stage. Trenton stopped talking. His arrogant, smug smile faltered. as Eleanor completely bypassed the front row of very important person seating and walked directly up the short wooden steps onto the presentation stage. She completely ignored Trenton's outstretched hand, walking right past him to seize the secondary microphone from its heavy iron stand. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," Eleanor announced, her voice booming relentlessly through the cavernous lobby and instantly silencing the frantic murmurs. "My name is Eleanor Sterling. I am here today to officially and publicly announce the immediate unilateral termination of my $1.2 billion development contract with Vanguard Zenith Holdings." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Camera shutters began firing like a barrage of machine guns. Financial journalists scrambled to turn on their digital recorders. "I am pulling every single cent of my funding," Eleanor continued, turning her head to stare dead at Arthur Vance, her voice dripping with absolute disdain. "I am taking this action due to gross negligence, severe technical incompetence, and active corporate fraud. This firm is completely incapable of building a physical structure, and they have actively lied to my board of directors about their operational capacity." The lobby erupted into absolute, uncontainable chaos. Reporters shoved their microphones forward against the security barricades, shouting 100 questions at once, over by the executive banner. Arthur's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, terrifying shade of ash white as he realized his entire net worth was vaporizing in real time. Trenton completely lost his mind, his carefully crafted tech bro persona shattered into a million jagged pieces under the blinding lights. He grabbed the edges of the crystal podium, his knuckles turning white, and began screaming hysterically over the deafening noise of the press pool. "This is a coordinated conspiracy," Trenton shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic and sweat pouring down his forehead. "You cannot do this to us. We have an ironclad development contract. You are being manipulated by a bitter, fired employee. I will sue you. I will sue Amelia Robinson into the absolute ground for tortious interference and corporate espionage. She is illegally stealing our clients. She is a fraud." That was my cue. I stepped out from the deep shadows behind the towering marble pillars at the back of the press pool. I wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, moving with the absolute chilling stillness of a predator that had already cornered its prey. I did not rush. I walked slowly and deliberately down the center aisle. The reporters parted for me just as they had for Eleanor, their camera lenses swinging wildly in my direction, bathing me in a continuous storm of white flashes. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Trenton, watching him hyperventilate on the stage. Arthur frantically tried to step forward to signal the security guards to stop me, but Eleanor's massive attorneys seamlessly shifted their weight, completely blocking his path. I walked straight up the stage stairs, stepped right next to a trembling, sweating Trenton, and forcefully claimed the physical space at the crystal podium. I did not yell over the crowd. I did not argue with his accusations. True power never has to raise its voice. I looked at Trenton with cold, dead eyes, then looked down at the podium. From my heavy leather briefcase, I pulled out 2 thick manila folders and slammed them down onto the polished glass surface with a resounding, violent crack that echoed sharply through the open microphones. The entire room fell into a sudden, breathless silence, waiting for my next move. "I did not steal your client, Trenton," I said, my voice dangerously calm, low, and echoing across the silent lobby. I tapped the thick cover of the first folder. This file contains the raw, encrypted server logs directly from the Chicago Municipal Zoning Department. It categorically and technologically proves that you, not I, used unauthorized executive access codes to forge federal environmental permits and fake a structural compliance report. Verified copies of these logs were delivered to the district attorney of Cook County exactly 1 hour ago. You are going to federal prison." Trenton's jaw dropped. All the air left his lungs. He staggered backward as if he had been physically struck in the chest, bumping hard into the promotional banner behind him and nearly tripping over the microphone cables. I slid the second folder forward, turning my gaze away from the broken boy and looking directly into the glowing camera lenses in front of me. And I did not come here today to debate architectural strategy or fight over a contract, I stated clearly, letting every single syllable sink in. I came here to deliver a legal notice in person. This document is a formal 30-day lease termination and eviction order. I leaned directly into the microphone, letting a cold, razor-sharp smile spread across my face as I delivered the final, fatal blow. You see, Arthur Vance recently sold this building's master lease to generate emergency cash. He sold it to an anonymous private investment fund. I am the sole managing director of that fund. I am your new landlord, and I am here to inform you that you are officially evicted from my building. Pack your boxes. The entire auditorium exploded into a deafening roar of shouting journalists and a blinding hurricane of camera flashes. It was absolute pandemonium. Trenton's knees finally gave out, and he collapsed right there on the stage, burying his face in his hands as the reality of his criminal charges and complete ruin washed over him, off to the side. Arthur Vance slumped against the marble wall, clutching his chest, his eyes completely vacant. He stared at the two folders on the podium, fully realizing that his century-old legacy, his wealth, and his entire empire had just been publicly slaughtered in broad daylight, exactly where he had tried to bury me. The morning after the press conference, the stock market opened with absolute brutality. Vanguard Zenith Holdings did not just take a minor hit. Their public valuation completely cratered. By the ringing of the opening bell, their share price had plummeted by over 60%. In a frantic, utterly pathetic attempt to appease a mob of furious institutional investors, Arthur officially terminated his own nephew. But a single sacrificial lamb cannot save a ship that is already resting at the bottom of the ocean. Trenton, completely stripped of his corporate armor and facing multiple federal indictments, took to his professional networking profiles. He posted incredibly long, rambling essays begging the industry for an opportunity to learn from his failures, claiming his intentions were always focused on digital innovation. The posts went instantly viral, turning him into the absolute laughingstock of the entire American commercial real estate sector. No developer in the country was ever going to hire a disgraced tech bro who forged municipal engineering permits. By the third week of their eviction notice, Vanguard was hemorrhaging cash so violently that they were days away from defaulting on their remaining corporate debts. They actually had the sheer audacity to send their senior legal representative down to my windowless Southside warehouse. The man sat across from my drafting table, sweating profusely, and practically begged me to buy their remaining portfolio of half-finished municipal projects for pennies on the dollar. It was their last desperate play to avoid a total bankruptcy declaration. I did not even look at the documents he placed on my desk. I just leaned back in my chair and looked at him with absolute, freezing indifference. "You can take those contracts back to Arthur," I told him quietly. "Tell him I only buy real estate that holds actual value. I do not buy trash." Exactly 30 days later, the Vanguard name was permanently scraped off the heavy glass doors of the skyscraper. That evening, I stood in the absolute center of the most luxurious corner office on the 40th floor, the exact same office where Arthur Vance had once sat and ordered my career execution. The massive mahogany desk was gone, replaced by a sleek, modern drafting table surrounded by the raw, physical blueprints of the city. My 4 master engineers were sitting on the leather sofas, laughing and celebrating our first official day out of the warehouse. Eleanor Sterling stood beside me by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a bottle of 20-year-old bourbon. She poured 2 generous glasses, handing one to me. We clinked our glasses together, the crystal ringing out clearly in the massive space. I took a slow, burning sip of the bourbon and looked down at the glowing Chicago skyline. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on against the darkening sky, illuminating the empty lots and harbors where brand new steel and glass would soon rise under a new empire. The Vanguard era was completely erased, the game was over, and the board had been completely reset. Ironclad development owned the sky now. Thank you all so incredibly much for taking the time to listen to this story today. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story entertaining and satisfying, I humbly ask for your continued support as we transition away from this platform, because our channel will no longer be uploading new videos here in the near future. We are moving all of our operations over to Patreon. Please help us keep these stories alive by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon community. There, you can listen to our absolute best, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or you can use the Patreon link provided in the video description and the pinned comment below. Thank you again. Stay strong, and I will see you on the winning side.